Hello Internet, here's a short little video tutorial on a metal guitar tone that I made using strictly stock plugins in Reaper. No extra VSTs or impulse responses were used. This video is kind of pointless because you can get amazing guitar tones with free plugins or with fairly affordable plugins, but I thought it'd be fun to sort of try to recreate a guitar tone using only stock guitar plugins, or not even guitar plugins, just stock plugins in Reaper. Some of these are JS, some of these are just re plugins. Let's take a listen to what the tone sounds like in the mix. All right, so how I started with this tone is I basically tried to establish a reference tone, something that I wanted to get close to. So I'm trying to get a sound that sounds something similar to Bleed by Meshuggah. So I have that isolated track, and trying to basically get as close as possible to that. So this is what my effects chain looks like. There's quite a big stack of effects. I will show you what they sound like individually and what my thought process was on a new track, and just put them down in order. I didn't come up with these in order, but the order is important here because we're basically trying to create a signal chain similar to overdrive pedal, compression, preamp, tone stack, power amp, and then something that sounds like a speaker, even though we're not actually using a speaker at all. So first thing in the signal chain is going to be an EQ, and it's a pretty drastic EQ. This is basically trying to simulate what I imagine the curve of an overdrive pedal will be. So I, pretty significant bump on the third band here, around the 12 hertz or 1200 hertz, and then another one over here. I just thought it kind of sounded good. On its own, the dry signal does not sound good at all. I will not play with the sound site just because I don't want to clip the signal or anything. But I turned the gain up all the way just to, simulate what the pushed boost would sound like, right? Because we're going to be driving this into a compressor and then into a distortion plugin. So next I put in a recomp, so that's just a compressor, and I use the stock just this little preset, just distort electric guitar. And the only change I really made was I think I put the knee size up all the way. I just thought that it sounded good, and I turned on auto makeup just to have the level be up as high as it can. Why? Just because I thought it sounded decent, but it might not be best practice. Next, I have the distortion plugin. I left it as is. This one actually doesn't have a whole lot of parameters to get lost in, but I turned the hardness up all the way. I turned the gain down to 10 instead of the 20 just because distortion is good, but you don't want to have just too much distortion where the clarity in the signal gets lost. And then I turned down the max volume to 30. I think this max volume works kind of like a threshold, so it's like where the signal will start to distort. So I turned it down to 30 just to, it felt like it was starting to, overdrive there nicely. Next, I add a saturation plugin. I just think saturation always sounds good, and I thought it kind of made the tone sound a little bit warm. So here's what we have so far. I will turn it down just a little bit, but this is going to sound pretty bad. Right, kind of sad sounding, right? So we need to keep going. Next, I added an EQ, and this EQ kind of acts like a tone stack. I took some mids out. This seems pretty drastic, but at the end of the day, once the tone is complete, it sounds pretty good. Boosted the highs a little bit just to give us some more presence, and I took out some more lows because in the dry DI signal, there's just a lot of bottom end that normally gets cut through a real amp anyway. Next, I added an exciter, and I kind of use this mainly as like a presence, right? Just to kind of excite the high frequency range. That's what it does. I turn the mix up all the way, and I have the drive at 50%. So this is what we have so far. And that's pretty terrible, and that's going to sound bad until we add the convolution amp / cab modeler. This I left as is, and I just used the JCM 800 setting. This says that it's an amp simulator. I believe this is like an impulse response loader. Maybe has some basic sort of a amp simulation on it, but this seems like a combination of amp plus cab. But at the end of the day, this is not going to sound like a Marshall anyway, and this impulse doesn't really sound much like a Marshall amp. So with that added, this is what we have. That's starting to sound a lot more usable, but we're not quite done yet. So we're going to add a presence control just to give ourselves a little bit more kind of air in the sound. There's like a little fizz that I find pleasant in high gain amps. Like in this tone, you hear there's a little bit of that fizz. And I think this presence control kind of helps get us closer to that. So you hear that on the pick attack, like you hear that little zingy, buzzy sort of sound when the pick touches the string. I think the presence EQ helps with that. And the settings on that, I pretty much left as is. I just added like 2 dB on the boost, and that's about it. Next, I added saturation, and this saturation I have at 50%, and mainly just to kind of simulate what power amp saturation would be doing. Next, we have EQ, and this is a pretty drastic EQ. I use this kind of to help with the simulation of the sound of a cab, even though this is not what the EQ curve of a cab looks like at all. I use this to kind of hunt down some fizzy frequencies that were not so pleasant, some hum. There's some a hum that really gets present when you have a lot of distortion. So I EQ'd a lot of that out, tamed the mids a little bit, and cut out a little bit more of the high or of the low end here, as well as cut off some of the extreme highs. So here's what we have so far. We are almost done. All right. All that's left is to add a gate, mainly just to not have noise happening when we're not playing. So it also, just kind of tightens the space between the palm mutes that I find, depending on how extreme you have the attack and release set. But I pretty much left this as is. I just brought up the threshold to 15 decibels. And this is basically the final tone. Not amazing, but when it's double tracked, I find that it sounds, pretty close, especially when you have it in a mix. I have this going into a folder where I'm doing a little bit of post-processing, just, some smaller surgical EQ moves. But yeah, and that's basically the stock metal guitar tone. The link to the effects chain will be in the description. If you want it, feel free to download it, play around with the values, see if you can come up with something better than me. Or, just change the order of things to see how you like it.